Hello and welcome to our show, Film Talk with AJ Dean. I'm your host, AJ Dean, and tonight we have a very, very special guest, a VIP, and I'm so thrilled to introduce her. She is absolutely beautiful in all ways, Miss Cheryl L. Bedford, and she is a special VIP. Hello, Cheryl, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to meet you finally. And I think Paul's going to come in. So let's say hello to Paul. Hey, Paul. Hey, Paul, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, great. I'd like to introduce Paul. He's my co-host. Cheryl, we've been talking with Paul on Clubhouse. Here he is. He's going to be just audio tonight. Isn't that right, Paul?
Yeah, if that's okay, because
we're so glad you're here. Thank you for being an amazing co-host, Paul. So let's get started, okay? I've got some wonderful notes here and some beautiful movie posters. First of all, I want to say a little bit about Cheryl, though, just to introduce her. Cheryl is a producer and a production manager. She's been a line producer. And you're also a Baltimore native. You hold a BFA from the New York University's TSOA and MFA in producing from AFI. So this is so incredible. We're going to talk about, you're also the founder of Women of Color Unite. I love this. This is dear to my heart. And you have over 30 years of experience in the film industry. Welcome,
Yes,
Cheryl. And yeah, go ahead.
No, thank you. And yeah, so I'm old. I've been around a long time. No, it's okay. Like, I own it. That the best part about being over 50 is that I say everything and anything that's on my mind. Like, I have no more filters. And also I was nominated for the NAACP Image Award for Dark Girls. I did not win.
You should have. I mean,
didn't.
You're a winner in my heart already and in Paul's heart. And so, yes, you should have one, because this film, Dark Girls, look at how beautiful the poster is. Can you tell us about that?
So that is that the original poster? So Dark Girls was really interesting. I did it when I was Bill Duke's producer. I was Bill Duke's producer for about 6 years. And Dark Girls is one of the projects that I did with Bill. He and Dee Chansonberry were both the directors of Dark Girls. And the interesting thing is that we had this huge premiere at TIFF, sold out. It was wonderful. And we could not get distribution. And because no one saw the value in it, which I find really interesting, because to this day, we get people from around the world who want to screen the movies in their classrooms, high school and college, and talk about colorism, because it's still a problem. And the movie is about, what is it now, about 11 years old. So that's why I always say we should have won, because it has, Dark Girls has absolutely stood the test of time. The interesting thing about Dark Girls, talk about going viral. We sent out a 9-minute clip, which you can still find on YouTube. And we sent it out to about, I'd say roughly, it's around 100 people in the entertainment business, right? Like, Bill sent it to people, Chan sent it to people, I sent it to people. We wanted to get a feel of how it was going. And Cameron Bailey, who was, now he's in charge of all of TIFF. He got it from, Cameron Bailey at the time I don't remember. I think he was like the director of the festival, um, and he saw it and hit us up and said, "I want that movie at TIFF." Here's the interesting part: we weren't done shooting, let alone editing. They purposely scheduled us for the second half of the festival. We got it done and shipped up there 2 days, two
Wow.
days before our premiere.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it must have been a whirlwind production, but Cheryl's so important with that intense deadline, really, to finish it, right?
Yeah, it really was. So that 100 people, I woke up, 40,000 people had viewed
Woo!
Dark. That is not a joke. Like my family called me because they, through friends of theirs, were sent that clip. And they were like, yeah. And we just started watching the count go up and up. That is not a joke. Like we sent it out one night and then 40,000 people had viewed it by the time we woke up.
Well, we want more to see it. So how can we see it?
It depends. Like I don't even know where it is right now. You could just Google it. It's been on Netflix. It's been on Stars. It's been I don't even know where now, but you can always find it.
Okay.
It still resonates with people around the world. It's probably one of the projects I am most proud of. And then it's interesting because you have the Mansfield 12. I always tell people that was probably the most fun I've ever had on a shoot. We had a really small crew. We It was just fun. It was just fun. And we shot it in 12, no, 14 days, 12 or 14 days. It's been a while. But
Amazing.
yeah, it has like Aaron D. Spears and it has Tony Todd, the original Candyman, and Joe Torre. Yeah, it was one of my to this day, one of my favorite films to ever work on. So it's funny that you picked those two because Dark Girls, I really I'm yeah, it just I'm proud. I'm proud of it. And Mansfield 12 because it was an independent film that I just had a lot of fun on that shoot. It was just a good shoot.
Amazing.
So those two, when you hit me up, I was like, yeah, all right, those two. And you
Yeah.
can still find the trailer for both of them on YouTube. So
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Well, I encourage everybody to check the Mansfield 12 out and Dark Girls. And I love the posters and they're so beautiful. They're works of art. I mean, I look at movie posters as art and they're so beautiful. So on Dark Girls, it says real women, real stories. So this is, how long is this? How long is Dark Girls?
the movie is about 70 minutes. It's a documentary, so it's about I think it clocks in at like 70, 72 minutes. And then Mansfield 12 is your typical independent film, about 90 minutes. So
Awesome. Awesome. What I wanted to ask about Dark Girls is it's a deep dive, isn't it, in the truth and what's really happening in the world. And it's still impactful today. So share with us your message about Dark Girls, Cheryl.
so it's about colorism. And the interesting thing, because documentaries sort of take you in different directions than you may have originally intended. So when we started Dark Girls, it was originally about colorism within the African American community. And at the deeper we dove into it, we realized that it's a worldwide problem. Like
Mhm.
I did not know until we did the documentary and within research that within Asian countries, you can't get a moisturizer that doesn't have a skin lightening aspect to it.
Oh.
Like they all, like everybody, and it really depends. Like within the United States, it's because of slavery, the legacy of slavery. In places like India, it's colonialism, and in places like China, Japan, places like that, that's a classism because that's a classism issue those who work inside versus those who work outside.
Yeah.
So it depends upon, which part of the world you live in, but they all have a problem with colorism. And it's really because anything considered, the closer proximity you have to whiteness, the better you are, the prettier. And I'm putting all of this in quotes, right? And the worst thing is that there's footage in Dark Girls about the second time that they did the doll test, in which a doll looks, there's nothing different about the doll except skin tone, right? And to watch little Black girls choose the darkest doll when they say who's ugly, who's stupid, who's, oh yeah.
Wow,
So,
that's not right. I was gonna say they choose it because it's the most beautiful. That's what I was thinking.
No.
Whoa.
No.
Whoa, oh, Cheryl, this is so sad. This is not right.
So, I mean, but if you look at, Hollywood is okay, let's talk about Hollywood. Hollywood is to blame, right?
Yeah.
Because and I will say in front of and behind the camera, right? Like if you look at a lot of people who've been around for years and years and years, Black women, let's say, most of them are light skinned,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
The Gina Davis Institute, what is that, cjane.org? They have statistical breakdowns about colorism. And then if you look at studies from the National Institute of Health, dark-skinned women suffer from depression at 30% more than brown skin or light skinned women, let alone white women. But there's a direct correlation between images in the media, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
think about everybody who is considered beautiful within, regarding Black women in the industry. And you think about things that Viola Davis has said, and she's actually in Dark Girls. We interviewed her. So if you look at, the way that film and television has stereotyped dark-skinned Black women, but you can even see that within the Asian community, right?
Yeah.
You tend to see more of, East Asian versus South Asian, and so it's within it, even within the Latino. Like I did not realize that 25% of Latinos are actually Afro-Latinos. They're Afro-Latinos.
Awesome.
25%. But you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that from film and television and the media.
That's true. It's so biased, isn't it? It's so biased and it's not right and it needs to change. And this is so important to me as well. And I know it's important to you, Paul. Paul, over to you. Wanted to give you a chance to
Wonderful. Thank you. It's always wonderful to listen to you, Cheryl, because you always bring such knowledge and hopefully get some understanding from people. But and it is true when you speak of the Latino community, unless you start diving into it, you don't realize that. And especially, I can speak from like a Chicano or a Mexican American or Mexican point of view, in that, we're like, oh yeah, of course, but they're all Cuban or Dominican, anyone in the islands, of course, Brazil, things like that. But if you go and do some research, you see that in Mexico, there's definitely Afro Mexicans, Mexicans that live in these communities that are, descendant from the slave trade. So there's definitely Mexican Americans, but we're not, for some reason, we're not taught that. And we just assume like, oh, it's the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans and the Dominicans and
wasn't Khalifa the woman who actually California is her name? It wasn't she actually Afro-Mexican?
Probably.
Yeah,
yes.
I think she was.
Yeah.
So that's the interesting thing, that our history, when people talk about like critical race theory, and which by the way isn't taught until colleges, so everybody calm down. But what we're talking about is this idea of understanding our history and how Black people, Latinx, have contributed to this country.
So much.
But specifically Black and Indigenous, right? So you guys, you've heard me say it ad nauseum, why it is BIPOC, and I understand there's a lot of pushback to it, but I think it's because people don't actually understand why it is actually in that order. Black, Indigenous, people of color. And that is because our entire economic system is based on the backs of enslaved Africans, literally built on the land of the Indigenous, and all other people of color have benefited from those two things.
Yeah.
Right? Like it wasn't, I moderated a film for my friend Dr. Jolie Proudfit called Imagining the Indian. And when I watched it, I did not realize that there were as many Native Americans in the US, what we think of now as the US, as there were white people in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I didn't like that those numbers like didn't actually occur to me, right? Because of the fact that, again, history I've been taught, whitewashed. Right?
Me too.
You would think, right? You would think that there were what, a couple of million when there were actually what, 26 million?
Yeah.
So when you look at the population of Europe now, understand that should be the population of Native Americans within the US, and they actually only make up 1% because of genocide, right? So it's really just understanding history and not the history that we were taught.
Correct. Because we were taught lies. You're the founder of Women of Color Unite. And let's talk about that, because this is part of the change, Cheryl, that's making a difference. This is what I'm talking about, standing up for our sisters all the way around the world. So you've got a great example. Is this based in Los Angeles?
Yes, because I'm based in Los Angeles, but we have expanded to Canada and the UK with Start With 8, our mentorship program. Hashtag Start With 8, our mentorship program. So so the interesting thing is I did not mean to become the leader of a grassroots movement. Now we are the largest nonprofit of women of color in entertainment. The actor Kelly Perrine, who a lot of people would know from the show One on One, has been a friend of mine for over 20 years. And Kelly has a beautiful house in the hills and lent me his house. And because I just wanted to get all the women of color that I knew together in one room. And and the other thing was, if you got an invite, you could invite other women of color. 50 became 75, 150 women of color showed up. Now, I knew that I wanted to do something, right? Because I'm not just the kind of person who's going to sit there and just bitch and complain. Like, I'm going to bitch, I'm going to complain, and then I'm going to give solutions, right?
Get into action, yep.
Exactly. So I had decided that we were going to form a database. So the database actually came first, and that's a JTC list, and that is actually named after my mother, who was an activist who passed away in February of 2016. So we held this event in February of 2018. So, but that, and I say it all the time, that moment became a movement. So that very first invitation for that February 2018 event said, women of color, ... and then in all caps, unite.
Yeah.
That's where the name comes from. So by the end of the year, we were a nonprofit. 4.5 years later, we're the largest nonprofit of women of color in entertainment. And the interesting thing about us is that I don't charge my members.
Oh, wow.
Anything. There's no membership fee there for any of the events. And the reason that I decided to do, and trust me, everybody pushed back. Everybody's like, I can't, like, why don't you charge them some? And I said, it is because I felt that a lot of the white female-run nonprofit organizations, similar, that they had pushed us to the margins by the fees, right? Because if you look at what African-American women make, Indigenous women make, Latinas make. Like, if you look at those numbers, then why are you charging us the same fees, right? But then whenever somebody talks about diversity, then you want to use our faces. I'm just going to say it, you want to use Black bodies for capital. I so yeah, so I don't charge. Yeah, I don't charge. I ask the women to donate what they can when they can. Also went broke. This isn't a joke. I maxed out, excuse me, I maxed out 5 credit cards. And I always say this is the best, worst advice I ever got was from Marva Smalls, the Chief Diversity Officer at Viacom, who I met before we were the JTC list. And this was in September, October of 2018. And she said, come out standing on your own 2 feet. Don't get a fiscal sponsor. Come out standing on your own 2 feet. That was the best advice I got. I say it was the worst advice I got because nobody told me that I was going to go broke for 2.5 years.
Wow.
5 credit cards.
Whoa.
That is not a joke.
That's
and also, I was talking the way that I always talk, and becoming more well known for it. And the jobs that I had lined up as a line producer started all disappearing. So I tell people this story. It was January 2020. Now think about that for a second. Sitting in my car, in my garage, crying because I hadn't borrowed money from anybody in, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years. And I'm sitting there and I'm crying because I don't want to ask my family. And I heard my mother in my head. My mother was a statistician along with being an activist. And so she was very logical, most logical person I've ever met in my life. And I could hear her. And she's like, okay, wipe your tears and just call your family. Like, it's really just not that big of a deal. And I'm sitting there and I'm talking to her in my head. I'm like, bye-bye, I want to borrow money. I'm 50, what was I, 51, 52 at the time. And I'm like, I want to borrow money. I haven't borrowed money in like 20 years. And she's like, And your uncles were arrested during the civil rights movement. Your grandparents put up their house to get them out of jail. Wow. This is nothing. Call up, and I actually heard her say, call up Janice. So my mother has 2 younger sisters, my Aunt Janice and my Aunt Mary. And she's like, call up Janice. Yeah. And then call Mary. I have to tell you, I never had to get to Mary because I called Janice. And Janice, and the interesting thing was, I called Janice, she picked up and said, how much do you need? Your mother just told me, not a joke. Your mother just told me that you were going to call and borrow money. How much do you need? And here's what my mother said to me in my head. She said, oh, these are first world problems. My mother was very practical. She's like, sitting in, this is not a joke, sitting in your BMW hardtop convertible, crying about, at least you have family who can lend you the money. Nobody said that this fight was going to be easy.
True. But, and she's right.
Pandemic. 2 months later, nobody was out of work. I had worked. I got the unemployment. I paid my family back. Like, it was like, I literally, like, they were paid back within, that was January, I think by April.
Amazing.
So,
Cheryl, there's always a way, isn't there, Cheryl?
There is. And that's the thing. And that's when I do feel low, because women and girl of color run nonprofits only receive 0.5% of all grant and foundation money. If you look at everything that like we have done at Women of Color Unite, but then you look at like women in film, you look at other diversity programs and so forth and so on. I will match what Women of Color Unite has done in 4.5 years up against any of them that have been around sometimes 30, 40 years. They got brick and mortars. They can pay people. I will have none of that. And yet we've gotten 2 1,000 women of color in 3 countries, 2 mentors within the entertainment industry in 2 years.
That's phenomenal growth. And so congratulations, Cheryl, on that. And how can people support Women of Color Unite?
Donate. You can go to www.vocunite.org/donate. Like, we got to donate. Because here's my biggest problem. So obviously during the pandemic and the rebellion and everybody started talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been doing this all my life. The very first time I marched, it was 1968. I was 2. It was during the Baltimore riots. I was on my mama's hip. Like, this has been my life. My Uncle Thomas, who's a retired judge in Baltimore, Maryland, helped to pass the Americans with Disabilities Act. My aunt, Janice, the one that I mentioned, just finished her tenure, I think a year and a half ago, as the president of the National Association of Black Storytellers. My aunt, Mary C. Curtis, is a very well-known journalist, right? I grew up doing this. This is my life. I've always marched. Like, I've always marched and protested. It was my life. Problem is that during the Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, all of that money went to white-run organizations who all of a sudden had a diversity program, had a pipeline. Here's the thing. I am not adverse to pipelines, obviously, right? Like, I don't, but we're concentrating so much on pipelines and we're forgetting about all the people out there who've hit that intersectionality of racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, colorism, sizism, homophobia, who've been working in this industry 20 years and hit not a glass ceiling, a concrete one. Yeah. But now we have all of these pipeline problems. But here's what I can tell you. If we don't get all of those people who've been in this industry 20 years in VP roles, EVP roles, presidents, CEOs,
yes,
and sitting on boards, all those people coming up on pipelines, what do you think is going to happen to them?
Yeah.
And here's how I know history. Don't forget, most of these DEIA programs have been around. Well, now we call it DEIA-B, actually, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging. But DEI programs have been around 30 years. Because when I graduated, so again, I have a BFA from NYU Film School. When I attended NYU, it was the #1 film school in the country. When I attended, so I graduated in 1988, started the American Film Institute in 1990. When I went there, it was the #1 film school in the country. Yeah. Now, right now, AFI is #1, NYU is #2, right? Right at this moment. So when I graduated with a master's degree from AFI in 1993, less than 200 people in the entire world had a master's degree from the American Film Institute. Now, remember, this is pre-internet, right? Yeah. This is really just as computers and the internet and so forth and so on. So you sent out your resume the usual way. Well, look at my resume. Look at my name. No one expected this face to walk in. And literally every studio that I went into where I had an interview was like, yeah, and then they'd hand me those diversity forms. And I ripped it off. At that point in time, when I graduated, having gone to 2 of the top film schools, having won awards already, but then instead of getting the interview, you're going to hand me one of those diversity forms. And I read it. And you know what they wanted?
Disgusting, though, Cheryl. Disgusting.
Yeah, but they wanted what we call now trauma essays, right? Which is poor little me. Now, here's the thing. I'm just a middle-class Black girl from Baltimore. I've gone to private school my entire life, except for kindergarten. Like, that's not my story. If that's your story, that's great. That's not my story. But it's something that my mother said, right? As an activist, people who want to break their arms, patting themselves on the back. That's what those diversity things are. Well, we'll have 5,000 people apply for 20 spots, right? Here's the thing. I'm not fighting you as a woman. I'm not fighting Paul as a Latino. I'm not fighting. You can't make me. You can't make me have Fight Club with all the other people who've been pushed to the margin. Independent producer. And that's really what happened. I went like everybody else to the studios. I should have gotten a goddamn job. But everybody wanted me to jump through those hoops as opposed to giving me an actual interview. And I was like, ooh. And here's the thing. That was 1993. 1993. And we still look at the numbers. So that's how I know that all those people who are coming up through all those pipelines ain't gonna get shit, change some shit.
Absolutely. And you mentioned we need more people of color in those higher executive studio positions. And this is serious. So I want to gather everybody's support and say, you can right now, you can donate to Women of Color Unite and know it's going to help directly to Cheryl and her committee and her company, and it's going to help. It's not going to be sidelined off to or filtered off to another department. It's going to go right to helping women of color. And this is what's so important. Isn't that right, Cheryl?
Oh, yeah. So we do a lot of things. We do statistical analysis. We were one of the first people who actually pulled women of color because we were either lumped with women or people of color. So we were the first ones who pulled it out and talked about the unions. You can go to our website because we put it all up there, right? So I tell people all the time, it's not a pipeline problem.
Yeah.
IOPSI, Teamsters talking to you. It is a union problem, right? But we put out the statistics. We also realized that, the 40% of women of color after 10 years leave the entertainment industry because they hit that concrete ceiling. 40%. That is my mission. I'm out to stop that hemorrhage.
Yeah.
That's 40%. And it's not that people couldn't make it. These are people with 10 years experience.
Yeah. Wow.
They can't make a living at it. They still can't level up. And so they leave. So we do statistical analysis. We obviously have Start with Age. We have 2 white papers. The newest one is a screenwriting contest, Transparency. Yeah, Blacklist and Coverfly, I'm talking to you. We saw what happened with the Austin Film Festival. Here's the thing. If you're going to target people who've been pushed to the margins, they need to know who's reading this. Here's the thing. We don't ever call out anybody because it's all of them, right? Those are the 2 that people know the most about.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the day, we give solutions, and not only solutions, but where the solutions have actually worked. It's not like we're the ones inventing the wheel. And here's the thing. We did not do that. And what I mean is me and my staff. One of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that we can, with everything that we do, that we help to empower other people. So 3 women of color, 1 Latinx, 1 Asian, 1 African American, got together because they started looking at the notes that they and other members of Woke U were getting. And they put out a survey and they put it together, and then they wrote it and then came to me and Manon the Reaper. Manon made it look pretty, and we went through it, and I went out and started talking to our other partners so that other people would sign on to this screenwriting contest Transparency white paper. And it's brilliant, right? And so then we did one during the rebellion with the CSA. It's called Reimagining Casting. People can sign up, you can download it. You can make a pledge to do better for both of them. There are places there people can tell their stories about other things and tell us the good and the bad, right? Like we do actually believe in a balance. So that's that. We developed the Woke You seal, which is so the reframe stamp is women in film and Sundance. They came up with this thing called the reframe stamp. There's just a little problem with the reframe stamp. So there are 8 categories. You get 1 point for hiring a white woman, 2 points for hiring a woman of color. But here's the thing. You only need 4 points to get the reframe stamp. Somebody do the math. That means that you could get the stamp and never hire a woman of color. And I got a problem with that. I have a problem with that.
Yeah, yeah.
They also don't include line producers, which I think is absolutely ridiculous since line producers are the ones who hire people. But anyway, I digress. So we came up with the Woke You seal. The Woke You seal is 20%, hiring 20% women of color above and below the line, and you get the Woke You seal. And people always ask me, why 20%? Because we make up 20% of the population. How about that?
Yeah.
We just want you to do with the world the way that the world looks, right? And then, of course, there are our events. So for our events, there's one thing that we realized very, very early on. Lists are like phone books to white folk in this industry. They're like, we call it exclusion by familiarity. Didn't go to school with any, don't live near any, don't golf with them, right? It's exclusion by familiarity. So if you hand somebody a list, they're looking at it like, I don't know what to do with this, right? It's like a phone book. It's impersonal. But you know it does work when you can get those who can hire, fund, and distribute in the same room. Because another part of the problem with diversity, equity, and inclusion programs is that they have otherized people. And when you otherize somebody, you dehumanize them. So we throw events to realize that all those people have been pushed to the margins, who you're like, they want it, like, I don't know, and all of that just want the same things you do. That's it. That's it. And so what happens is I've seen people get hired on the spot at all of our events. But what that actually also does is then it becomes the recommendation. So here's the funny thing. I was talking to my assistant, who's also an administrator, who handles the requests for the JTC list. And because she handles that, like I don't even see it. You can go to the jtclist.com. There's also a link from Women of Color Unite, WOCunite.org to get it. And you have to request it. It is not something that is a searchable database. We send, because we want to keep track of who we send it to, so that when a company is like, we don't know any, we can be like, yes, you do, because we sent it to this department on this day to this person. Yeah, it's accountability, right? So here's the funniest thing. So in the last year, 300 times. I didn't even realize. Yeah, I know. I didn't even realize that. Maybe it's a year and a half, 2. Yeah. 300 times. 300. And I knew we were the most successful database because of kind of the way that we built it. But that was even mind-blowing to me. And every studio, production companies, independents, like everybody. And yeah, so when people are like, where's your money go? Well, let me tell you, it can go to statistical analysis, it can go to our events, it can go to Run to Start with Aid, doing the white, name it. Like, we're always out there. Yeah, we're always out there. And again, shout out to my entire staff. Gregory Zide, who helped me to write our mission statement. So here's an interesting thing about our mission statement. We're now a nonprofit production company. Because when people were like, not giving us any money, I was like, well, let me think. I'm a producer. So we put together a slate of projects, and I've been out pitching as a nonprofit production company. Think of it like a tax incentive, right? To make a project with us. Oh, and here's the best thing. We don't own it. That IP stays in the hands of the marginalized person. And at least 50% of it has to remain in their hands. Whatever studio or network or whomever we're working with, you don't get that tax incentive. And that's how you build generational wealth.
Amazing, amazing. This is well done. This is brilliant. And what a incredible structure that you have built for your company. It's checking off all the right things, all the things that, gosh, you've looked at every aspect. So I just want to compliment you, Cheryl. You've done your homework. What I love about you, Cheryl, is you straight talk, you tell the truth, you're direct, and that's it. There's no BS. There's no sugarcoating, and that's what I love.
I'm over 50. Like I don't have. But here's the thing: I've never had time, and I've always been for the good and for the bad, right? Like sometimes, but I'd rather do it. I'd rather do it, and it really is one of those things where
it's worth it.
People get too caught up in their feelings, and I will say, even myself. And so it's really about the statistical analysis. It's about linking studies from the National Institute of Health. It's about telling people various studies to read, to look at, readings that they should do regarding history, regarding how things came about. It's all of that, right? Like it's not about our feelings and quotes. It's just not. Because
it's so true.
We see it through whatever lens we specifically have.
Absolutely.
And it's not about my feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. And this world, you're absolutely right, Cheryl. This world goes by statistics and numbers and paper trails and evidence, hard copy evidence, black and white evidence of things.
I don't know if you were in that clubhouse room that time when I was talking about white women and how they are the biggest recipients of affirmative action and yet the biggest proponents of it. And people didn't want to listen. Like nobody wanted to. No, I feel. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care how you feel. And that you as a white woman are talking about sexism. But don't forget that you also have a problem with racism. And so Black women and Asian women and Latinx and Indigenous, and Nina Swana, we've had all of that come at us, right? So that's the, kind of, and that's what I mean by feelings. Yes, I absolutely understand that women have faced sexism, absolutely. But you also then have to take into account the other isms. Racism isn't good for anybody's mental health. It's obviously not good for Black people or Indigenous or other people. We say push to the margins because we're actually the global majority. So, but it's actually not good for white men. It's not good for our economy, right? Like there are actual studies about how it's not good for the mental health of white men. And it has to do with the pressure and so forth. And so there are things, none of it is good for us as a society. So I mean, those are just I try to educate people. Sometimes I'm tired. Sometimes I'm just not today.
You do so good. And we are so proud of you. And thank you for bringing all of this to our attention. Cheryl, it's so needed. We need to talk about it. We need to have people educated, but they've got to do the educating themselves because the history is out there. And we've got to look up the articles and the real truth instead of the lies that we have been taught in school and at universities and all over the world. So your message is so important, and we hear your voice. I did want to ask you, are there any projects that you're excited about that you want to share that's upcoming for you?
Oh, wow. We have a whole slate of projects, so I don't want to piss anybody off.
Okay.
I have more shopping agreements right now. I would probably say my personal favorite, and it is the one that I was attached to before it became a project of Woke You, and that is Vote Love. And it is a interracial lesbian rom-com. And one of the people has to be Black, and the other woman is Korean American. And I love it. It's funny. It's just wrapped up. It's a rom-com. We have representation of everybody within it, people with disabilities, so forth and so on. And what I find interesting is the feedback I've gotten from white men in the industry as I'm trying to make this movie was that it was too, again, quote, diverse. And I'm like,
no, it's actually the correct representation. That's what it really is.
I was stunned. And it mainly had to do with, we had, there's a character who's in a wheelchair, and they're like, how to get in a wheelchair. And I was like, not about them. They're a secondary character. Like, they just happened to be a wheelchair user. Like, that's it. They're like, but people are going to want to know. I was like, do you ask people who are in a wheelchair as they walk in the street? Like, why are you in a wheelchair? Here's an interesting thing. Two of my members, actually, I mentioned that comment at an event, and they both looked at me and said, yes. And I was like, wait, random people on the street? They're like, yes. Random people on the street are like, why are you in the wheelchair? I was just like, oh, okay. Because that would never occur to me.
Me neither.
And they're like, and yes, and please don't put that in your movie. Please, Cheryl. Please don't, because it's annoying, it's offensive, and so forth and so on. But I felt that really, I was like, random people.
Yeah.
You on the street.
Yeah.
Yes, get in the way of our wheelchair. And they're like, why are you in the wheelchair? And I realized that that's Hollywood's fault, because 25% of the American population has a visible or invisible disability. If we all live long enough, we will all have a disability.
Yeah.
Like
an experience. Yes, absolutely.
Percent of our population. So we're just going to run around and ask, every fourth person we run into, what's your it's Hollywood.
Yeah.
In a way that we have erased people with disabilities. Right? That's the problem.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So we just need to normalize it, right? So I actually did this. I made a deal. Well, not a deal. So at Women of Color Unite, I really focus on the most marginalized, which are women of color with disabilities. And because of the work that my Uncle Thomas has done, his youngest son, my cousin is disabled. So it's just part of who I am. I am no longer on panels that don't have somebody with a disability. If you don't have somebody with a disability, I'm not doing your panel. And then they always say, I can't find any. And I'm like, oh, I know people. I mean, we have a whole ass organization, Respectability, that we work with. But if you can't, I can always find someone. That's why I have Disabled Advocates of Women of Color Unite. Like, I can always find somebody. And then somebody once told me that they didn't have room. So, I sent somebody with a disability in my place.
Awesome. Awesome, Cheryl. This world has to change, and we have to be the change artists for that vehicle, because otherwise people, they just don't listen. They don't pay attention. We have to be loud and clear and direct on our message,
Yeah, and if I'm asking white people to use your privilege to help someone, or rather, and it's really not even we're trying to change language, right? It's actually the power of whiteness. If we're going to ask you to use that power, then I have to do the same thing, right? I have to understand what are the privileges? What's the power that I have, right? And so I have to use that So if you want me to sit on a panel, and people want me to sit on panels all the time. I mean, when you doing this podcast, I got 2 more like back to back after this, right? Like not today, but within the next week. I do them all the time. People ask me to sit on panels all the time. And if you, and some paid, some not, but if you ask me, regardless, you have to have somebody who has a disability, or am I sitting on it? Like, because that's the power that I am using. You want me to sit there and talk about everything that I talk about and throw out the facts and link it to studies from National Institute of Health and blah, blah, blah. You want me to do all of that? Great. Let's have somebody with a disability on that panel, right? Like,
Right.
what's the problem? So if and I remember who it was that there it was it was Caitlin Yang. Caitlin Yang was who I sent. Caitlin Yang is supposed has her own host company. She's such a badass. She's such a badass.
Awesome. That's
And
super.
it was Caitlin.
Oh, and I love that. And I love your heart, Cheryl. You're just so generous and caring, and you make things go right, Cheryl. You make things go right. You're an instigator for that, and we love you so, so much. I'm going to have to start wrapping it up. I'm so sorry it's gone so fast. Paul, I wanted to hand it over to you and ask if you had any questions or anything you wanted to say, Paul.
No, thank you. And let me tell you why. I mean, it's when Cheryl is speaking, I love to listen, and it's gone all the way back to the clubhouse rooms. And I think I've DM'd Cheryl before, like when we're especially in the heated room, and I'm like, thank you, keep it up. So you know me, I'm kind of here for the lightness, the comedy, maybe. But there's these are not joking matters, and maybe sometimes we deal with them in that way, or I do, and maybe we have to, but I love the fact that you're not a hypocrite, because even going to what these you said, these are things that people are always like, oh, that wasn't fair, or I feel this way, I feel that way, but then they're just putting it on other people, not themselves. So I love that fact about you, Cheryl, and I would of course I would love to have you on my podcast, and just to delve deeper into I'd love to hear about your wonderful mother and your upbringing and all that. I mean, I've gotten a taste of it, but really, you're just such a wonderful human being, and thank you, because it affects us all.
Yeah,
it's not just a black thing. It's not a black and white thing. It's it's a Latino thing. It's an indigenous thing. So thank you for fighting the good fight for us.
Well, thank you very much for all of those. Those are really kind words. I just don't care.
Oh, those were some of my favorites. And it was like my guilty pleasure. I'm like, yes, Cheryl, yes, because nobody else is, everyone's lovey-dovey, and maybe Pollyanna is not lovey-dovey, but maybe like Pollyanna, and it's, oh, yes, the Hollywood doesn't discriminate. Like, oh, just work hard and you'll get it. And I love also the fact that you talked about a concrete ceiling, because you're right, a glass ceiling can and has been shattered, but a concrete one cannot.
Yeah.
So I love that analogy, and I could go on forever, but when Cheryl is talking and AJ's interviewing, I'm like, you know what, Paul, for once, keep your mouth shut and kind of learn something. So thank you.
Well, thank you both for being so kind. Those were some rooms. Those were absolutely some rooms. But here's what I think that a lot of people don't understand is that I really am fighting for my life. Like that's a thing that people don't understand. Like, I'm fighting for my life. I'm fighting for my people. I'm fighting for people of color. Like, because of all of the damage that Hollywood has done, right? Like, and I don't want the next generation to have to go through that. And it really is. And look, it's in my clubhouse profile, right? And it says, my mother told me this ad nauseum ever since I can remember. Cheryl, you have one job as a human being on this planet. That is to make the world a better place for the next generation. And by doing that, you make it a better place now.
Yes, amen.
I've lived my entire life like
That
that.
way.
So I, like I said, I'm the daughter of an activist. I can't,
Yeah.
it is what it is what it is. And sometimes, it's gotten me in trouble. It's lost me jobs. But I wouldn't have it. I wouldn't have it any other way. I really wouldn't have it any other way. And you guys have always been so supportive of me in those
And so we're going to do
rooms when I'm-
final thoughts now, okay? So I always do this on our program. We do final thoughts. Paul, over to you. Final thoughts. We'll start with you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for allowing me to even be here for this, AJ. This was such a wonderful interview. It's one of the ones that stands out because Cheryl has so much to say, and I'm glad that people can hear the things that maybe they don't want to listen to.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we've given her a platform, and but she all by all means, she can go anywhere else. So thank you, Cheryl, for being here. And of course, yeah, I'd love to have you on Paul Vato Presents, my podcast. And I'd love to introduce you to my friend Del Zamora, who I feel like you guys are kind of fighting that same fight. He's Latino and indigenous, and he has a lot to say. So you guys are either going to love each other or hate each other. I don't know, but you guys are both fighting the good fight. So I would love to introduce you to
Bring them together.
Wait, what did you say his name was?
Del Zamora.
Okay.
And he was in Repo Man. That was his first big movie with Alex Cox back in the 80s, Repo Man, and then RoboCop, and all the way. I mean, he's a consummate working actor. He's been working, but fighting for the rights of, how, and he has proof of how he's been paid so much less. And then and people don't believe him. Even other Latino actors, they're like, no, Del, it's because you're always complaining. So when you were talking about what happened, after you started talking and speaking up, and then the jobs started disappearing. People think that that's what's going on with Del, but he's like, they weren't going to give it to me anyways. So but he's got a list. He and another friend Lalo have this list of 7,000 times that non-Latino actors have played Latinos, and maybe the inverse is true a handful of times. Is that whole thing of, well, they look like you, so they can play you, but then it's like, well, then if they look like us, why don't we look like them? Why can't we play
Exactly
those characters?
I was there with my college roommate. She and I are still friends, Joan Barons, and we're just sitting in the back smoking our cigarettes, watching Repo Man. I'll never forget it.
I would love for you to talk to him. Yeah, he was one of the Lagarto brothers, one of the two Latino brothers in the Lowrider. He's one. Okay. He was a major part in that film. And he still stays in touch with Alex Cox, the director, from the UK. So sorry to hijack final thoughts, but I was like, you know what, Cheryl and Del need to meet and maybe discuss some things, because he's got the same thing with this film that he's been working on for 9 years and just wrapped photography, on some flashback scenes yesterday or day before. And it's one of these films that people want to see in schools. They beg him to bring it out to schools, and he does. Even in its unfinished form, people pay to screen this. So it reminds me of what you were saying with Dark Girls. That it's a project that people need to see, and people want to see it, and they're paying to, hopefully they're paying to bring it out to screen at their schools and organizations.
So yes, I will do the podcast, and I'd love to meet your friend, especially
you got it,
since
my friend.
that is actually a really happy memory for me. Sitting in, I think it was the very first time that I was like, because I went to college, like, I was 17 when I started. I mean, I then turned 18, but so yeah, sitting there watching it, and I want to say it was freshman or sophomore year. Like it was like 1984, 1985. Somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And I will never forget. It was one of my, because I was like, oh, we can sit back here, and like I felt like such a dang adult. Anyway, I digress. Anyway, but it was a very, very happy memory for me.
He would love to hear that, because that movie is one of these instrumental movies. These quintessential 80s movies. It's an homage to LA.
Incredible.
I was 19 years old. I was in New York City nightclub promoter. And the reason I started promoting was because when I was 19, when I turned 19, that was a drinking age in New York City. My birthday is in September.
What day?
I'm September 26th.
I'm September 18th.
You're Virgo, I'm a Libra, but we're both sapphires.
Yes.
So, but as of January 1st, I couldn't drink. And I had just started like trying to cocktail waitress at Heartbreak. And because my roommate at the time, Joan Barron, who I mentioned, she was the cigarette girl at Heartbreak. She was the one who got me over there. And so I'd done a couple of days as like a cocktail wait. And then I couldn't drink. I couldn't serve alcohol anymore. And so I met this guy who worked at there, Marty Kirshner, who was a nightclub promoter, and I worked under Marty.
That's great.
And I was a New York City nightclub promoter when I was 19.
Wow, Cheryl. Wow, what an incredible life you have. This is amazing. It's so wonderful to get to know you and to hear these wonderful things that you're doing. And of course, everybody, I want to say, please support Women of Color Unite. And please support Cheryl. Follow her on Instagram and Facebook. Check out Dark Girls and the Mansfield 12. And anything else you wanted to promote, Cheryl?
No, also Twitter.
Twitter.
I did the very first round of Start With 8. So it was a Twitter movement that we turned into a program. And I am a former chair of diversity development at New York Film Academy, Los Angeles branch. So I was used to building actual programs. So we sent out a survey and we asked the women who had taken part, what we could do better, what they got out of it. And over 70%, almost 75%, so what they got the most out of it was hope. And that's why I do what I do. It's hope. I can talk about these statistics all day long, but for every win, and we get our wins, it just gives me more and more people out there creating change. We're not the only ones. There's London Duro and Women of Color filmmakers. There is respectability, as I mentioned earlier. There are people who are out there doing things who are actually making a difference. And the reason we all do this, hope.
I love this so much. Hope. It's what it's all about. The hope in my heart, the hope in your heart. So I want to encourage everybody out there to hire, if you're a film director, hire women of color, hire men of color, all shades, all categories, all sizes, all disabilities or non-disabilities, whatever.
Yeah, hire, just hire the way the world looks. You'll be all right. Like, just hire the way the world looks. Oh, and speaking of Women of Color, you almost forgot. We helped Men of Color Unite. So our brother organization, we're going to serve as their fiscal sponsor. Some of the founding members are Gino Brooks, V at Crew Me Up, Craig Williams, who runs the largest Black screenwriters group on Facebook, Gil Jackson.
Gil Jackson.
Nelson.
Nelson.
Nelson and Fanny have Evanita. Like, we got everybody. Floyd Marshall. God, who am I forgetting? Floyd, Robert Butler, Jason Taylor, all these guys. They basically got together and they are the founding members of Men of Color Unite. Women of Color Unite will serve as their fiscal sponsor.
Congratulations. I'm so thrilled and happy and proud of you and everyone.
Well, here's the funny thing. So I was like, you guys have to get a mission statement. And then they read me the mission statement. I was like, that sounds awfully familiar because it was ours.
All you got to do.
They were like, if it ain't broke, we'll fix it. But they added one additional thing. Gino Brooks went to an HBCU. I did not. Obviously, I went to NYU. So they wanted to make it part of their mission statement to do more outreach to HBCUs, which I just love. So that is our one difference when you read our mission statements, but pretty much they just copied and pasted.
Yeah, just with that. Knock out the "wa" from woman, and now it's men.
Yes.
And there you go. Just keep it simple. Thank you.
That's pretty much exactly what they did. I am not mad at that. They are, yeah, they're getting up and running. So I'm very, very proud of them. And Women of Color Unite. So we kind of pushed them. We were like, they're like, why isn't there anything for guys like this? And I was like, so what y'all gonna do about it?
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I am so proud of you. And this is it. Everybody join and support Women of Color Unite and Men of Color Unite. And until we meet again, I just want to thank you so much, Cheryl L. Bedford. Please support her and all the great projects she is involved in. Check out these movies. And we love you so much, Cheryl. Continue doing your work. That is the very best. It's your destiny. It is your calling. And let us know how we can help you as well in any way, okay?
Well, thank you both very much. Yes, Paul, I will do your podcast. AJ, you've always been so supportive. The both of you have. Thank you for having me. It is now 9:15 p.m. on a Friday night. And I'm going to go have a little shot of tequila in my refrigerator.
Okay.
I'm going to go do that. It's really good too. It has a little taste of cucumber and a little taste of jalapeno.
Ooh.
Oh, it's good.
Can I have a shot? Can I have one too, Cheryl?
Yes, Monty Maduro actually got it for me. So anyway, thank you both so much for having me. I'm so glad we could finally do this, AJ. You and I have been trying to do this for months now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We love you so much. Much love to you and respect, Cheryl. You are beautiful, like I said, in so many ways, and we look up to you and you inspire us. So we love you. Have a beautiful evening. And until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.